Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging up a really wild story from a lost empire. It's a myth about a god who lost a fight. I mean, he lost so badly, he had to cheat just to win it back. Alright, so what if a god, a powerful deity, actually lost a battle? And not just lost, but had to resort to cheating to get a win. That's exactly what we're talking about today. We're going to head back thousands of years to the Hittite Empire, looking at a story they etched onto clay tablets in what's now Turkey. This is the myth of Illuyanka, and it kicks off with something you almost never see in mythology: a powerful god, completely and utterly defeated. So let's set the scene. You've got the mighty storm god Teşub right in the heart of Anatolia. This guy is supposed to be the embodiment of divine order. He goes head-to-head with this massive serpent dragon Illuyanka, and guess what? Teşub loses. The good guy, the symbol of order, gets taken down. And that single loss just throws the whole cosmic balance into absolute chaos. Yeah, and we're not just talking about a simple defeat. In one version of this myth, Illuyanka doesn't just win, it steals Teşub's heart and his eyes. Think about that. He's left powerless, incomplete. The humiliation is just profound. He's been physically mutilated, robbed of his very essence. And that, right there, transforms this from just a story about a fight into a deeply personal, brutal quest for revenge. So, Teşub is out of the picture, crippled and powerless. Someone has to step up, right? Well, that's where the goddess Inara comes in. She takes one look at Teşub's failure and figures, okay, brute force is clearly not the answer here. So she comes up with a whole new plan, one that's all about cunning, seduction, and good old-fashioned trickery. And this is where things get really interesting, because you see the gods start to use very human desires as tools for their own grand plans. Inara finds this mortal guy, Pihaziti, and she makes him a deal. She promises to sleep with him if he helps her out. You know, his desire becomes the key to her whole scheme. But, as we're about to find out, it also ends up sealing his really tragic fate.
So what is this big, cunning plan? Well, it's actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. Inara doesn't try to fight the dragon head-on. Nope. She decides to exploit its biggest weakness: gluttony. Her trap is basically a 5-step process. First, throw a huge party with tons of booze. Then, lure Illuyanka and its kids out of their lair. Let them drink until they can't even move. Once they're totally bloated and drunk, Pihaziti just has to tie them up. Simple, right?
And it works. With Illuyanka all tied up, Teşub shows up and finishes the job. He gets his revenge. But what about Pihaziti, the mortal who made it all happen? Well, his story takes a dark turn. Inara basically puts him under house arrest, warning him not to look out the window at his old life. But he gets homesick, he disobeys, and for that simple act of longing, she kills him. It's a pretty harsh reminder that if you're a mortal pawn in a game of the gods, there's probably not going to be a happy ending for you.
Okay, so that's one version. But now, let's look at the second telling of this story, which is honestly a whole lot darker. In this one, Teşub doesn't rely on another goddess. Oh no. The wounded storm god himself orchestrates the revenge plot, and it is a long, calculated, and just deeply tragic plan.
So to get his heart and eyes back, Teşub doesn't just recruit some stranger. He creates his own tool for revenge. He marries a mortal woman and has a son, but not out of love or for a family. He does it for one single cold-blooded purpose: to raise this kid to infiltrate the enemy's family. This child is, from the moment he's born, just a weapon in his father's long game. And the plan is just insidious. The son grows up and he marries the daughter of Illuyanka, his father's greatest enemy. Then, on his dad's orders, he uses the sacred bond of marriage to get back what was stolen. He asks for Teşub's heart and eyes as a wedding gift. And his new family, completely in the dark, just hands them over. Can you imagine? So, Teşub is fully restored. He's got his power back. He goes to the seashore to finally confront Illuyanka. But his son is there. And in that moment, the son realizes he's been used. He was just a pawn. His loyalty is completely torn between his father and the family he married into. So he cries out, "Kill me along with him! Spare me not!" He literally chooses death over living with this betrayal. And Teşub, he does it. He kills them both, his enemy and his own son. So when you put these two versions next to each other, you can really see how the story changed over time. The old version is kind of a classic tale of trickery, right? Pihaziti is a stranger, the method is getting the dragon drunk.
But the new version, that's a whole different beast. It's a complex family tragedy. The helper is Teshub's own son. The method is marriage and infiltration. And the helper's fate? He's killed by his own father. The stakes are so much more personal, and the ending is just gut-wrench.
So you have to wonder, why would the Hittites tell such a grim story? What was the point? Well, this was way more than just a spooky story to tell around the campfire. This myth was a really critical piece of their culture, their rituals, and how they saw the world. It turns out this entire myth was the foundational story for something called the Purulliyaš festival. This was a huge spring festival, kind of like their New Year's celebration. And during this festival, they would recite the story of Ilyanka. The idea was that by telling the story of Teshub's victory, they were actually helping to make it happen again, ensuring that spring would defeat winter and cosmic order would be restored for the new year. And of course, scholars see a ton of symbolic meaning here. On one level, yeah, it's about the eternal battle between chaos, represented by Ilyanka, and order, represented by Teshub. It's also a clear seasonal struggle between winter and spring. You can even see connections to other big myths, like the Babylonian creation myth of Tiamat. But it was also political. The myth was probably a way to legitimize the power of the Hittite king, basically saying he's on Team Teshub, the guy who brings order.
Okay, now for what I think is one of the coolest parts about this entire myth. You know how with most ancient stories we have no idea who wrote them? They're just anonymous tales passed down through time? Well, not this one. We actually know the names of the people who recorded it, which gives us this incredibly rare personal connection to the past. And let me tell you, this is a very big deal. In a world of oral traditions and anonymous scribes, putting your name on your work, that was a huge step. It's this fascinating early emergence of individualism in literature. It's like they were saying, I made this, long before that was a common thing to do.
So let's actually give them their credit, right? The storytellers behind the Ilyanka myth. The compiler was a priest named Kella, and the scribe who actually carved this into the clay was a guy named Pihaziti. Knowing their names, it just adds this amazing human face to this ancient epic story.
Which brings us to our final question. The story of Ilyanka isn't just about gods and monsters, you know. It's about the humans who get caught in the middle. The fates of Humiliaš and Teshub's own son, they really force us to think about divine justice. When the gods use mortals like pawns and then just get rid of them? Where do you draw the line between a noble sacrifice and cold-blooded murder?